They were called masks of shame, cold, heavy, and grotesque, molded from iron and made to mock the very face that wore them. Behind each one was a woman whose only crime was to speak, to laugh too loudly, or to be seen as vain. In towns across Europe, from Germany to Italy, from England to the Netherlands, these masks hung in public squares beside the stocks and whipping posts, waiting for their next victim. They came in many shapes. Some had long noses to symbolize lying. Others had twisted smiles, jagged tongues, or protruding horns, visual accusations of vanity or lust. The cruelest of all contained spikes inside, pressing into the tongue or cheeks, ensuring that even the smallest word drew blood. When a woman was found guilty, not of theft or murder, but of gossip, pride, or disobedience, she would be led into the square as the blacksmith prepared the mask. The crowd would gather, murmuring, some amused, others silent. The executioner or town constable would clamp the metal contraption over her head, tightening the straps until the iron scraped her skin. She could see through slits. She could breathe, barely, but she could not speak, and that was the point. These shame masks, or Schammasken as they were, called in parts of Germany, were designed to silence women, literally. They took the idea of social punishment and turned it into performance. The woman became an exhibit. Her face turned into a caricature of sin. In Nuremberg, one surviving mask features a tongue made of sharp metal, meant to pierce the mouth of any scold. Another, from Florence, depicts the face of a pig, used for women accused of gluttony or lust. The wearer's humanity was stripped away. She became her supposed sin, made visible for all to laugh at. And laugh they did. Children threw stones. Men jeered. Women turned away, clutching their shawls, afraid that one wrong word could make them next. The humiliation was part of the sentence. It wasn't just punishment. It was theater. The condemned woman would be paraded through the streets, sometimes led by rope, sometimes forced to ring a bell so everyone could see her coming. The sound of that bell became a symbol of disgrace. Doors would open, laughter would follow, and the lesson would spread: silence yourself before society does it for you. In England, a variation of the device called the scold's bridle became infamous. It consisted of an iron frame that enclosed the entire head, with a metal bit pushed into the mouth. Some bits had spikes. Others had small bells attached so that the sound of humiliation followed her every step. The crime was often laughably small. A woman might have argued with her husband, contradicted a priest, spoken to freely at market, or simply been disliked. And the verdict came not from a royal court, but from neighbors. The same community that once shared bread with her now demanded her silence. In one recorded case from the 1500s, a woman in Scotland named Jenny was accused of unwomanly words after scolding a local official. She was fitted with a bridle and paraded for 2 days. By the end of it, her face was torn raw, her lips swollen, and her eyes bloodshot. But when the mask was finally removed, witnesses said she smiled, a quiet, bleeding defiance. In Germany, court records from Augsburg describe another woman, Anna T., forced to wear a mask shaped like a donkey's face for excessive vanity. The eyes were cut into slits that distorted her vision. The nose, long and downward, dripped with iron tears. She collapsed halfway through her public walk. The guards lifted her by the chains, dragging her through the square while people pointed and laughed. And all of it, every wound, every scar, was legal. The church called it moral correction. Towns called it justice. Husbands called it discipline. But for the women who wore those masks, it was pure dehumanization. Imagine the cold iron burning against skin in winter, the smell of rust mixing with blood and sweat, the weight pressing on the skull for hours, sometimes days. Some women fainted, some bit through their tongues trying to scream. Others were left permanently disfigured, scars around their mouths that never healed. And yet, after the sentence ended, they were expected to return to normal life, to smile again, to serve, to stay quiet. The punishment didn't end when the mask came off, because the memory never did. Neighbors would whisper, children would point. The face that once wore iron became a reminder of shame long after the wounds closed. It was psychological torture disguised as morality. By the 17th century, the practice spread beyond women. Men accused of drunkenness, lying, or cowardice were sometimes fitted with masks shaped like animals, goats, foxes, donkeys, symbols of their sins. But the humiliation of women remained its most common purpose. The worst part, many believed it worked. Silence was restored, order maintained. And yet beneath that surface, fear fermented, a quiet rebellion that history almost erased. Every mask that survives today sits behind museum glass, polished and labeled as artifacts. But they were never art. They were warnings. Each one still carries the echo of the women who wore it. The heat of their breath trapped behind iron, the faint sound of a muffled sob. And somewhere in those echoes, Europe's conscience still flinches. The shame masks weren't just tools of punishment. They were mirrors, reflecting a society that feared women's voices more than violence itself. Even centuries later, the echoes of those women's cries seemed to cling to the rusted iron. Behind every surviving mask lies a life erased, a story that never made it past a courtroom, a husband's accusation, or a whisper among neighbors. By the late 1600s, towns across Europe had refined the art of humiliation. Public squares became stages. The accused stood at the center, while the crowd played the jury, the judge, and the executioner of dignity. And for women, accusation was often enough. In one German record, a midwife named Greta was blamed for a difficult childbirth. The child had died, and superstition did the rest. They called her a loose tongue, a woman who spoke curses instead of prayers. The townsmith forged a new mask for her, one that covered her face entirely, save for a hole to pour in water when she fainted. She was left standing in the market for hours. When the sun set, her husband begged the constable to release her. They did, but she never spoke again. In Florence, a court decree described how women who bring shame by words shall be made a lesson to all. Some were marched through the piazza in masks so heavy that their necks bent under the weight. Others had iron gags forcing their jaws open, a mockery of their supposed crime. The message was always the same: your voice is your sin. What made the punishment so effective wasn't just its cruelty. It was its spectacle. Everyone watched, everyone learned. And the fear of becoming the next masked figure was enough to keep an entire gender silent. But what the authorities couldn't see was how the punishment itself began to rot the moral order it claimed to protect. The silence it enforced wasn't peace, it was paralysis. The women who had once taught, traded, healed, and led communities began to disappear from public life. Not because they were less capable, but because they were terrified, behind closed doors. Some masks were kept by households as disciplinary tools. Husbands or fathers could use them in private. A few were lined with thorns. Others had built-in locks, ensuring the wearer couldn't remove them. Without help, the iron pressed against flesh until obedience returned. And yet, history rarely names these women. We only know the masks, not the faces that wore them. The 18th century brought whispers of change. Philosophers began questioning public punishment. Doctors warned that the metal could cause infections and madness. But even as the Enlightenment promised reason, the shadows of old cruelty remain. The shame masks didn't vanish overnight. They faded, slipping from law into folklore, from tool to curiosity. By the time they were displayed in museums, they were stripped of the screams that once filled them. Visitors stared, horrified yet detached, never realizing that these objects were instruments of gendered terror. Every bend of metal, every spike, every rusted hinge still carries the memory of breath, of women made to stand beneath the eyes of their neighbors and accept that their worth had been turned into a warning. And somewhere between history's lines lies a deeper truth. It wasn't the mask that destroyed them. It was the belief that silence equaled virtue, that obedience was purity. The shame masks were the physical form of control, but the real prison was invisible, the fear that speaking might make you next. Today, Those relics rest behind glass under soft museum lights. But if you look closely, you'll see more than iron. You'll see the outline of a face. You'll see where pain met metal, where the voice ended and the silence began. And if you listen, really listen, maybe you'll still hear the faint breath of someone who refused to bow, even behind the steel. Because every rusted mask tells the same story. A warning, yes, but also a whisper of defiance. That even when they were made to be silent, they were still heard. History tried to bury them under shame, but the iron couldn't hold their spirit forever. And as those masks hang cold and empty today, they remind us of one truth that time can't erase. Silence was never peace. It was punishment. If stories like this shake you, remember, every piece of history has a voice, even the ones forced quiet. Don't let their pain fade into artifacts. Keep listening, keep remembering, and never forget what silence once cost.